This bike is a great choice for riding in the peloton. And here's a hint. It has to do with a magic number. Hi, I'm Jack from In Guide's Life, and we wanted episode 1 to be something special. So we got a hold of the BMC Teammachine SLR01. Special thanks to BMC and Papa Wheelie's Bike Shops for supplying the equipment so we could get this review to you. So the inspiration for this video came from a viewer, a guy named Omar Reyes Solar Zano. Great cycling name. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Omar, this one's for you. So like a lot of bike manufacturers, BMC has 3 bikes in their road performance lineup. They have an aero bike that they call the Time Machine. They have a all-arounder, which is this bike, that they call the Team Machine. And then they have an endurance bike that they call the Road Machine. Now within the Team Machine line, there's 3 offerings. They have the SLR01, which is their premium high modulus carbon fiber layup. They have the SLR, which is the base carbon fiber layup, and they have the ALR, which is their aluminum version of the bike. Now, within those segments, they have different tiers of components. This is the 3rd tier, and what that means is it has a 2-piece cockpit. It has a bar and a stem, whereas the first 2 tiers, the 1 and 2, have a monocoque bar and stem. It's a 1-piece bar and stem. So what I'm going to do when I'm talking about the ride feel, the way this bike handles, is I'm going to be referring to our mental framework for understanding a bike's road feel. And we did a video on this called How to Buy a Bike that I strongly urge you to watch if you haven't already seen it. The way I went into this review was what I like to call the blank canvas method. I didn't watch other videos about this bike. I didn't go to the BMC website to read up on the bike. I had no idea what the geometry specs were. I just went in with the blank canvas so I could use our mental framework for understanding the way a bike feels and kind of get us just a sense of what I felt. And it was only after I'd ridden, tested the bikes, that I kind of did a dive into what this bike is all about, took a look at the geometry specs, that kind of thing. It was time to ride the bike. So I hop on the bike and go for a ride. First thing I noticed right off the bat was how smooth the bike was at the crank. So we did a video on this about smoothness. We try and put a link in the description. But in my mind, what makes a bike feel smooth, when you're pedaling it feels very smooth, is the bike is square. So there's no deflection of the chain. The chain is running on the teeth of the cassette and the teeth of the chain rings very smoothly. The other thing is the bike's stiffness. When it has a nice stiff bottom bracket, when it has nice stiff chain stays, there's no flexing. The bike just has a very smooth, solid sensation when you're pedaling it. And I noticed that right off the bat. Very good, very satisfying, very smooth sense of pedaling this bike. Smoothness at the crank. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me was how well the bike no-hands. I don't know if you've ever been on a bike and you go to no-hand it and you go maybe 200-300 meters and you find yourself reaching down for the bars because the bars are dipping on you one way or the other and you need to catch that bike before it puts you on the ground. This bike, I no-handed it, probably rode the bike 2 miles before I had to reach down for the bars because I came to a stop sign and there was oncoming traffic, so I had to stop at the stop sign. I probably could have done the whole ride no-handed, which is very helpful and you're riding in a group. It's nice to be able to no-hand that bike and know that you're not gonna have to correct it with your hips. No hands, like a champ. As a bike tester, you always want to know, is that bike compliant? And of course, this bike is compliant. Has a very good layup. You hit some broken pavement, the bike soaks it up. There's not that shock being transferred through the bike and into you. But what I noticed about compliance is it was frame based. It was wheels and tire based. So if you've ever been on a bike and you hit some bad pavement, but you don't get that big shock, but you notice that the seat post is flexing back and forth. Some of that vibration, some of that road shock is taken away by that force absorption of the seat post kind of pogo sticking. Well, when you hit some bad pavement on this thing, you run over the manhole cover on this thing, you get great dampening, but you don't feel that rocking at the seat post. I just think it's because the bike is very well laid up. One of the things I noticed was it has great lean away. I don't know if you've ever done this, but you're riding along and you notice something in the road you can't go over. Maybe it's a pothole with a really deep lip, and if you were to hit that, you might put a dent in your wheel or you might pop your tire. You can't hit that, and it's too late to maneuver around, so you got to push the bike away. On this bike, on lean away, there's not a lot of recoil. You push that bike away and it stays on that line, and then you can bring your body back and you're still on that line. Very good tracking on lean away. Tracking in general. You get this bike up to race velocity, 22, 25 miles an hour or faster. The bike is like it's on rails. Another thing along those lines, and I call this drifting the bike. I'm not sure that's the correct bike tester term, but that's what I call it. So you're riding along, you're on the right side of the road, and maybe there's some construction vehicles up in front, and there's a policeman, and so you got to drift the bike over to the left, and then you're going to go around whatever you got to go around, right? That's the drift. You stand up, you're cranking the bars, you're leaning the bike a little bit to the left. Well, there's a terminus, right? You want that drift to stop. Sometimes you're on a bike and you get to that terminus and you right the bike and it snaps back on you. It recoils on you. You have to correct that. On this bike, you end that drift, you get to the terminus of your drift, you tell it to stop, right, with your input. Now you're bringing the bike up. Boom. The bike heels sharply. It's right there for you. It's almost like it's reading your mind what you want to do. It's crazy. It's just something like I noticed it because I drift my bike all the time. It's fun. The first thing I did with this bike was take it into the studio to get some detail shots. And the reason I did that first is you're never going to get the bike cleaner than when it's fresh out of the box. The good thing for bike testing about doing these detail shots is you really have to take a close, hard look at the bike when you're doing that. And you just notice some things like how well this bike is designed, the contours of the tube shapes. This bike has crazy lines. You notice the chunkiness of the bottom bracket. You notice the head tube and how the headset is integrated with the head tube. You notice the head tube fork junction. Very clean lines. Wonderful cable management at the headset. And I think that's one of the reasons why the bars swing so free. There's no cable impingement that's holding up the bar swing one way or the other. I noticed the rough side to the seat post. The seat post on the front is roughed up so it can catch that binder bolt and have a nice secure fit so your seat post isn't going to slip when you're out there riding it. The dropouts. I've never seen dropouts on a bike like this before. There's a hole for the through axle to go in, but on the opposite side, it's a smooth finish. You don't see any threads. It's very attention to detail, very clean look to it. And when you combine that with the SRAM E-tab, it's very clean. There's no wires. Even though Di2 is electronic, it has those wires. Well, you don't have any wires when you have a wireless system. So the only things you have on this bike are two hydraulic hoses. Very clean design. The last thing I noticed was the paint job. The orange paint with metal flakes in there is a stunning paint job. Really popped in the studio. And when you get it outside, you get it in the sun or even in the shadows, the bike is very colorful. It really shows through. Now, after I got all the shots, I put the bike on the scale to see what it weighed. And it was about what I expected. I think it was about 17.17 pounds. If you shelled out a little more money for one of the higher tiers, you would get lighter components and the bike would probably be very close to the UCI weight limit. So the next thing I did with the bike is, let's call it some light wrenching. For example, when you go to reinstall the rear wheel, the tolerances are very precise. Very tight tolerances. I dropped the rear wheel out of the bike I ride. You know, it's got a through axle, disc brakes. You go to put that wheel back in, right? And it's flopping all over the place. And it's hard to determine, am I putting this wheel in true? Is this wheel going in straight? On this Teammachine SLR01, the wheel's not flopping around in there. Oh, you put the through axle in, you don't kind of have to correct the direction of the wheel. It's just like going straight ahead. You tighten up the through axle, spin that wheel zero rotor rub. You don't have to make any adjustments to your rear brake. I think, again, it's a testament to the attention to detail and the precision layup, because that wheel is just in there really nice. That's what I noticed when I wrenched on this bike a little bit. So the next thing we did with the bike was we took it to In Guide's Life International World Headquarters Bike Testing Facility. It's on the side of a hill and has this great corner for testing bikes. Now, the reason this corner is so great is because it has a nice long radius. So if you're out there and you're riding your bike, you're out there doing a ride, you're going to go through some 90-degree corners. They just happen so fast, you can't get a feel for what's going on. Well, because this radius is so long, it's more time for you to kind of get a feel for what's happening. The other thing is there's a couple transitions. Because of the nature of the corner, you've got to make a right entry. You have to lean the bike over to the right. Well, then you got to do a quick transition, lean it over to the left so you can make this long radius. And then you have to do a transition for the radius out. So you got a couple of transitions in there, and you get to feel what the bike is like on a left to right lean or a right to left lean. You got to nudge it pretty good to lean it over. It's tracking really well. Well, if it's tracking really well and the bike's trying to go straight, it takes a little more input. It takes a little more input from the rider to kind of break it off that line it's on to get it on a new line, a carving line, a side lean line. But the thing is, once you get it off of that line, the bike feels very free. Now, because I can just do rep after rep on this long radius, I was really able to get a sense for what this bike is doing when it's on edge, the edge control of this bike. So when you're turning the bike with your hips, that's primarily a function of the wheelbase. And because it's got a nice long wheelbase, because it's an all-arounder, it has a nice confident feel to it when you get it on that car. Whatever it is about the layup, it's distributing the forces evenly over both wheels. So on some bikes I take into the test corner, you're trying to get the bike to corner, right? So you're gonna put some input in there. You're gonna push down on the inside drop. You're gonna crank down on your outside foot to kind of pressure the bike, load the bike up so it will react for you. And then what happens when you do that is you kind of feel like you're overloading the front wheel, and you feel like a lot of G's coming back into your hands, but you're not feeling it on your saddle as much. It feels like it's kind of concentrated to the front wheel, and the front wheel feels like it's struggling for grip. Well, on this bike, I didn't get that. No matter how hard I pushed down on the inside drop, it felt like the weight was evenly distributed. And the bike on a radius had a very light feeling to it. Like it wasn't struggling for grip, it was just slicing through that radius. Very confidence inspiring, because you're like, well, I could push this bike as hard as I want and it's going to do what I want. I'm not going to wash out the tires and, put myself on the ground. And the other thing too was I got more of a sensation of being on top and out front. Part of that's because the bars were so high. I wasn't able to lower the stem about 2 inches higher than I normally ride a bike. A half centimeter is a lot. Well, what's 2 inches? Typically if you got your bars way up there, so you got a lot of weight on the rear wheel, the bike's going to understeer and it's going to want to fade to the outside. The bike wasn't doing that. It was staying very true to the line that I entered that corner on. But when I'm putting a bunch of pressure to kind of form the bike up so I could take more speed around that radius, it didn't feel like it was going to oversteer on me. It didn't feel like it wanted to cut to the inside. It wanted to stay on that line. Because if the bike tracks good in a straight line when you're upright, and now you lean it over and it's carving a radius, that's another kind of line. You're leaned over, but it's still a line, and the bike tracks really well on that carve. For me, seems like a very good bike for the peloton. A very good bike when you're in the middle of a pack of riders. That tracking, that light feel going through the corner, it just kind of puts you at ease. If I'm on a bike and I'm, railing it through a corner and I feel like, I'm getting a lot of feedback, like it wants grip. Every time me and 100 of my friends in the peloton are going through a corner, I don't want that. I want that feeling of ease. I don't even want to think about it. I want the bike to stay on line. Like I said, this park is on the side of a hill. And every time you're climbing up, you get a chance to test out the climbing. Nice lively climber, good and stiff, not wooden. And so obviously what you want with the bike when you're climbing is you stand up, you're cranking the bars, you want the force that you're putting into it to propel you forward. You don't want that force to be absorbed, so you want the bike to be stiff. Well, if you have a very stiff layout and you don't do it right, you can make the bike feel wooden. Yeah, it's resisting your forces, but there's no kind of whip, you know, it doesn't have that lively feel to it. So if you get the layup right, you get the best of both worlds. There's a little whip to it, but it's resisting your forces, and that's what I felt with this bike. Stiff, lively climber, and a great tracker through the radius. So that's what the test track day did for me. Confirmed my initial impressions, but then it gave me some deeper insight of what it's like to make those left-right transitions. It takes a little bit more of a nudge to make that transition because it's just tracking so well. The bike wants to stay upright and it wants to stay in a straight line. Here's the thing about these modern race bikes that you might have noticed. They have very similar design elements. There's just certain things that kind of work. For instance, this bike has drop stays. It's got a sloping top tube. If you notice, a lot of bikes got that because it works. It shrinks the triangles so you can have a stiffer bike with less material, stiffer, lighter. The other thing it does is it moves those stays out of the wind, so the bike's more aerodynamic. That's just something that works. So when you're a bike designer and you want a light, stiff bike that's aerodynamic, you're gonna have drop stays and a sloping top tube. But if you're a bike tester and you're trying to figure out what's going on with the bike, it's difficult to just look at it and determine what's going on because so many bikes look the same but have subtle differences or sometimes significant differences in the way they handle. So I go to the BMC website to check out what's going on. I'm going to do a check of the geometry specs. The thing is, being the marketing guy that I am, I wanted to kind of look into the brand a little bit, right? I wanted the brand story. And it turns out they started in the mid 80s. There was a guy that was wholesaling Raleigh bikes, and he started a venture called BMC, which stands for Bicycle Manufacturing Company. In 2000, Andy Reese, owner of the Phonak cycling team, decides he wants to build a Porsche of bikes in Grenchen, Switzerland. So they build a carbon production facility there and they start making bikes. That facility is now the Impec Lab. And it's an R&D facility. They can prototype new bikes in-house, and they do a ton of testing there in a great environment of the Dura Mountains in Switzerland. So they have valleys they can ride through, and they got mountains they can climb up and down, and you just test these bikes out. That story is significant to what's going on with this bike. But before I put that together, I want to talk about the magic number. The number that I saw, and instantly everything I was feeling with this bike started making a lot of sense. And it's the trail number. Trail is the distance between the contact patch of the tire, where the tire hits the ground, and the steerer tube. This bike has 5 millimeters more trail than any other bike I could find. A bike that has a lot of trail might have a trail number of like 58 millimeters. That's a lot of trail. And what trail does is it has a caster effect. So the more trail, the bigger that number, the more the front wheel wants to self-center. It wants to stay going straight. Increasing the trail value creates a corresponding reduction in the rake value. Decreasing the fork's rake increases the stability of the steering response. This combination of less rake and more trail is why it takes more rider input to initiate a line change on this bike. Now here's the thing, if you don't get the layup right, all that trail is going to make the bike feel sluggish. It's not going to feel responsive. It's not going to be lively. But that's not the case with this bike. Why? Because they got the layup right. The forces that are going into this bike are evenly distributed. You can stand up on this bike, climb on this bike, and it's very resistant to your forces, but it's lively. You can hit some rough pavement and it has good compliance. Stiffness, compliance, equal distribution of forces. Because of the layup. That's what's going on. And I think it has something to do with the R&D facility, the Impec facility. If you got a facility where you can in-house turn out quickly new prototypes, and then you can give it to testers who have a good feel for bikes and can test it on various terrain right outside the Impact factory doors. You're going to get a situation where you can have a highly refined bike. Because if all these bicycles out there have very similar design elements, it's the stuff inside you can't see. It's the layup you can't see. It's the refinement of those pieces of carbon fiber and how much and where they're placed in that frame that's going to refine the ride. So, before I give this bike a flow score and tell you who I recommend it for, let me tell you who I don't recommend it for. Hot rodders. This ain't a hot rodding bike. So you think like a bike like the System 6, that aero bike. Very highly maneuverable bike. Short wheelbase, steep front end, stiff layup. I mean, you go out there and hot rod that bike by yourself, right? Because if I was riding that bike 4 hours on a peloton, I would be the guy bumping into everybody. You know, I'd be the guy that like, I got off that bike and be like, wow, that was tiresome. No thanks. Because it's a bike to hot rod. It's a bike to go out there and do a fast time and a solo ride. This bike, this BMC Teammachine SLR01, this is a peloton bike. This is a bike racer's bike. This is a bike for people that ride in big groups. It has great manners. The bike's going to track for you. You're not going to be bumping into people. If you need to lean that bike away, it's not going to snap back on you. If you're drifting that bike across the road, you get to the end of the road, it's going to stay right there for you. If you're in a corner with a bunch of dudes or dudettes around you, it's going to hold that line. You don't have to worry about bumping shoulders. You're going to have a lot of confidence. You're not going to have to think about it. You're just going to be able to do it. So if the way you're finding the flow state is to go out there and ride in a large group, and you can just be focused on being part of that group, like one of the fish in a school of fish, or one of the birds in the flock, and the flock turns and you easily flow with it. If that's your flow game, that's your bike, because that's what that bike's for, as far as I can tell. So if this content seems like something worth following for you, why not hit the subscribe button? I'll see you again for another episode of The Gear Guide Show. Thanks for watching.